sovereign God.
Amen.
All right. Okay. Now, Revelation chapter 12.
So are we going back to the beginning or are we moving forward?
We're going to pick up with verse 5.
Okay. You said you were going to come back to the beginning again later.
We are,
All right. So
but not yet.
I'm anxious for that.
Not yet.
Too bad.
That's the astronomical part. I'm anxious
Uh-huh.
for that.
All right. Verse 5. Revelation chapter 12. Now, of course, keeping in mind that this is in the context of the first 4 verses that we've already studied, that we've determined that the woman that's mentioned in the first 4 verses is Israel. So, and she, Israel, gave birth to a son, a male, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Well, we don't have to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure that one out. I think that's pretty well self-explanatory.
My Bible, child is capitalized. That kind of narrows that down.
Yeah.
Well, mine's not.
Well, again, keep in mind that would be the interpreter's choice, because in the original Greek there are no capital letters.
Child is in italics as well in mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, this is where I'm confused about it, because it says here that a woman
Uh-huh.
is supposed to be represented as Israel, but Jesus wasn't born in Israel, was he?
Yeah.
He was?
Mhm.
Oh, I guess I was mistaken. Bethlehem, that's in Israel?
Yes.
5 miles from Jerusalem.
I think we cleared that up.
But yeah, as far as don't pay a whole lot of attention to capital letters and little letters and things of that sort. That's an interpreter's choice there, because in both Hebrew and Greek, unlike English, there aren't capital and little letters and whatever. Now, at least not in first century Greek. Now, by the 2nd and 3rd century, they had begun to develop a system of capital and small letters, but not early on. All right, verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she might be nourished for 1,260 days. Well, there's that number again. Now, does everybody remember how many months or how many years that was?
Isn't it 3.5?
Exactly 3.5 years. 42 30-day months. Now, a lot of people over the years have, guessed as to where this wilderness is. The most popular opinions, and that's all they are, is probably somewhere down in the area that early on was known as Edom, then during the New Testament era was known as Nabatea, would have been to the southeast of Israel. Of course, keeping in mind, folks, that is pure speculation. As you can see from this passage, it doesn't really say where it is. Wilderness could just as easily be east of there out in the desert. We don't know, but again, southeast of current Israel is the most popular opinion. Now, as for who all is going to be there, well, we know that a large portion of the Jewish population by this point will either be executed or will be soon thereafter. But some of them, and again, we know the Bible always talks about this select remnant, are the ones that are going to be saved. By the way, if you look in, and I'm not asking you to flip over to that because we're going to get to that passage later on, but Daniel 12:1 actually says that God's elect, which of course will be those that he has saved, will survive. But I want to call your attention to Matthew chapter 24. Matthew 24, verses 21 and 22, it says, "Then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever shall. And unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days shall be cut short." Now, some people think that somehow God is going to miraculously shorten the 24-hour day. But the more likely possibility is that God's just saying that, that's why he's keeping it to 3.5 years and not an extended period of time. And that's what it's talking about. But that they will be persecuted for that 3.5 year period. But that notice in Matthew 24, it does say that God's elect are going to be saved. Now, in that context, of course, that and in Revelation, the elect is not, again, talking about the church. Because how do we know it's not talking about the church?
Church is gone.
Church is gone. We're talking about faithful Jews at this particular point. One last thing. Look in, actually, a couple of things here. Look in Jeremiah chapter 30. Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7, it says, "Alas, for that day is great, there is none like it, and it is the time of Jacob's distress, but he will be saved from it." Once again, God's given several promises that even though the dragon is going to take out his wrath on Israel, God is not going to let Israel be wiped out. Look in Zechariah chapter 13. Again, keep in mind, Zechariah is just before Malachi. 13. Zechariah 13, verses 8 and 9. And in Zechariah 13, 8 and 9, it says, "And it will come about in all the land, declares the Lord, that 2 parts in it will be cut off and perish, but the third will be left in it. And I will bring the third part through the fire, refine them as silver is refined, and test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is my God." So that ought to kind of give you an idea right there as to how rough this period of time is going to be. 2/3 of the nation of Israel is going to perish during this period of time. God there promised in Zechariah that 1/3 of them would come to faith in Christ. All right.
Does that go along with like the 3 in the field and one's taken and
Well, no, that particular illustration is Christ was just illustrating this significance of the fact that during the rapture that it would take people completely off guard.
okay, that was for the church?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's for the church.
Okay.
All right, now, beginning in verse 7.
So, hang on, before you go
All right.
forward. It says, "And they fled into the wilderness." So this is basically the part where flee for the hills?
Yep,
Okay. And this is, they have gone to the wilderness
there you go.
for the last 3.5 years of
For the last 3.5 years.
Okay.
They are going to abandon that. Now, keeping in mind, there will still be Jews in Jerusalem. 1/3 of them are going to be saved out in the wilderness, but Jerusalem will still be populated by some Jews. How we know that is because when the Battle of Armageddon begins, not only will the armies of the world meet together there on the plain of Megiddo, but they will be marching on Jerusalem, and it will be at the point that Jerusalem is about to fall that Christ will intervene. And that's when he will bring his, elect from the 4 winds, including, the Jews that have been saved in the wilderness, as well as those that are there in Jerusalem. All right, now, in verse 7, it would seem to switch gears. I mean, he's talking in verses 5 and 6 about Israel fleeing to the wilderness to survive, and then beginning in verse 7, he starts talking about a war in heaven. While on the surface, it would seem that John is completely switching gears, what John is actually doing here is telling you what's really going on behind the scenes. Why is Israel fleeing to the wilderness, and why is Israel being attacked? Well, he gives us the explanation. It's not a separate story, it is a parallel explanation that he begins in verse 7. He says, there was war in heaven. Michael, now by the way, this is where our little study in Daniel chapter 10 comes in, where Michael was introduced. Now we see another issue where Michael, who we were told in Daniel is the protector of Israel, well, lo and behold, here he is. There was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels waged war. And they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan. And by the way, that's the passage there where it becomes obvious that for those that, trying to interpret, well, who is the dragon? Well, John tells us point blank in that verse that the dragon is in fact the devil. It says, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Now, does anybody know what the terms devil and Satan actually mean? Keep in mind that Satan is not a name, it's a title. But what does the term devil and Satan mean?
Evil, temptation.
Deceiver.
Well, those are things that the devil and Satan, that he is, but it's not what they mean. First off, the term devil basically means an accuser. That is one of the reasons why the Bible is so vehement that gossip and false witness is such a heinous sin, and why false witness is included among the major things that 10 Commandments say, thou shalt not. Because false accusation is, well, guess who started it? Devil did. And the term devil literally means in Hebrew accuser.
My Greek dictionary here says diablos, the Greek.
That's the Greek.
False accuser, devil, slanderer.
Slanderer. Now, Satan, again, that is not a name. That's simply a Hebrew title. Satan means the adversary. All right, now.
So this
Go ahead.
war and Satan and his angels being thrown down to the earth, this is what's being described in other passages of tribulation of the stars falling from the sky. And you said that represented angels, not real physical stars.
Right. In this case, when it says that the devil took a third of the stars of heaven with him, that's prophetically speaking or euphemistically speaking of demons.
So this is just
fallen angels.
just another explanation of that occurrence.
Yep.
Okay.
So how many wars have there been with the angels against Satan?
Well, we know of at least one, and we know that there's going to be another. But now, the Bible doesn't really tell us if there's been more than that or not.
Or if it's
We
just
know
been
that when-
ongoing forever.
Yeah. We know that when the devil and his angels rebelled, there was war in heaven then. Now, this is describing a future war in heaven, that where there was a third of them thrown down. Of course, keeping in mind at this point, John may be rolling some of those two events together. But this is where we get the idea that a third of the angels in heaven rebelled because, well, it tells us here that the devil took a third of them with him. But now here's the question. if the devil is our accuser, why would at this point there be war in heaven and the devil then thrown out?
Because he accuses us in front of God,
All right?
who is in heaven.
Okay. Now keep going.
God got tired of hearing it.
All right. Let me paint the rest of the picture for you. What is one of the things that we know will happen fairly soon after the rapture with regard to the church?
There's the Bema seat, the judgment seat of Christ.
There you go. Judgment. Now, anytime there's a judgment, there are basically 4 players involved in it. You have the accused, that's us. You have the judge, who's that?
Jesus.
Well,
God the
Jesus,
Father.
actually.
God.
no,
Jesus.
Jesus.
Jesus. Our judge is Christ himself. Let me look that up for you.
No?
You gonna trust me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Jesus is our judge. Then the third figure in any court scene, prosecutor. Who's the prosecutor?
Jesus.
Satan.
Oh no, accuser. Yeah.
Satan is.
Exactly.
Because the Bible says, who accuses us day and night?
Lucifer.
There you go. The devil does. Devil just, told us right here. He's our accuser. All right, now, the fourth figure in any trial, if you got a prosecutor, guess who else you got?
Defense
A
attorney.
defense attorney. Who does the Bible say is our advocate? Is the word the Bible actually uses.
Jesus.
Jesus. Now here's where the cards are stacked against the devil. It just tells you that the devil's not quite as smart as he thinks he is. All right, if Jesus is our judge and he's also our defense attorney, does that not sound kind of like a lopsided court?
Too bad.
It's
Yeah.
okay. It's
Sort
not
of like the one they
like
have for
our
Trump
regular
right now.
What's that?
Sort of like the one they have for Trump right
Yeah, but that was on the other side, though.
now. That's what I'm saying. It's his
Yeah,
world.
basically, our own defense attorney is our judge, and he's sitting there looking at his books and going, nope, sorry. Don't see any evidence that a crime was committed. Now, Judgment Day, as Bruce just mentioned, we will stand before the judgment seat of Christ. The devil, his place that God allows him access to the throne is, we are told, and it's not just Judgment Day. The devil accuses us day and night, doesn't he?
Yep.
However, if Judgment Day has occurred, past tense,
He has no more work there.
his place in heaven is no longer necessary, because God's not going to allow him to continue accusing us when judgment has, Jesus has already brought the gavel down and said, sorry, innocent. There is no more. So guess why there's, let's see here, does it say? Yeah, verse 8 says, they were not strong enough and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. Guess why? Because Judgment Day has occurred and God is basically telling the devil,
Get
sorry,
out.
you're not needed anymore. Get out. Well, do you think the devil got out willingly?
Isaiah 14.
No, because it says.
Which
it
says
was
what?
thrown down.
Fall of Lucifer.
All right.
You want me to read it?
Of course, well that particular fall of Lucifer, that was the original sin. That was when he lost his position in heaven as the covering cherub.
He must really be a sinner.
I think that would be a good description of him.
Okay.
All right, yes, and of course that was, in that context, he was not Satan. He was the covering cherub. It was whenever, as the covering cherub, he let his pride get to him and he rebelled, that he became Satan, and there was war in heaven. He was cast out. But even being cast out, the devil is still allowed access to heaven. Now, we know this for a fact. Number one, the Bible tells us that the devil, as we just discussed, that he accuses us before the throne of God day and night. Well, you can't do that unless he's got access to heaven, can you? Secondly, in Job chapter 1 and again in chapter 2, it tells us that the devil, together with some of his entourage, went before the throne of God, and God allowed him to have access. The devil's only allowed to do what God, allows him. Well, as I said, at this point, if there's no longer a place found for him, that tells us judgment has occurred. It's done. And he is cast out. Now, as we will continue with this context, we will see that this all happens at about the midpoint of the tribulation, which tells us that our judgment, we don't know the exact timing on it, but judgment will occur sometime during that first 3.5 years. Because in the second 3.5 years, the devil is cast out. Now, who's been doing the devil's dirty work during the first 3.5 years?
Antichrist.
The Antichrist. Well, now you've got the Antichrist and the devil both wandering the earth, seeing what kind of devilment they can get involved in. Pun intended. So now that brings us to the question of, why is there war at this point?
He didn't leave willingly. God had
There
to
you
evict
go.
him.
Exactly. The devil's not going to say, "Oh, well, okay, God, I'll leave quietly." Of course he's not. Now, yes, could God have just done this to him? Sure, God could have. So I guess that brings up a whole nother theological question. Why do you think God allows this war to occur instead of just saying, "Devil, get out"? Why?
So we have something to do. Why doesn't he just, Satan, goodbye, poof?
He could.
I know
Absolutely.
he could, but why doesn't he?
That's the question.
That's almost like, is there a stone so big that God can't move it?
To glorify himself, more glorification.
No, I mean, I'm sure it will glorify him, but all right, consider this. Look at this whole situation from the perspective of those angels, the 2/3 of heaven, that did not rebel. If God simply did this, poof, to the devil and his third of the angelic host, his entourage, and just booted him out, from the perspective of the other 2/3 that have remained faithful, what would they be seeing at this point?
He'd wreak havoc with them. See?
That and
Would they be seeing God as arbitrary?
that, and I think consider the possibility of, what does a despot do to his subjects?
Executes them.
Absolutely. A despot allows no disagreement, no criticism, no nothing, and anybody that dares go head to head with a despotic ruler, they lose their head. Now,
It's like a witch trial almost.
yeah,
You
Now-
can't be a witch, and if you prove yourself not to be a witch, you're still dead.
you're still dead. Look at it from this perspective as well. I guess it was Sunday, I think, somebody in here, I don't remember who, you can, declare yourself guilty if this is you. Somebody in the crowd asked, did angels have free will?
Karen.
I don't know. I don't remember. I just know somebody asked the question.
It was me.
Okay.
Mario?
All right. Mario's pleading guilty. Here's the question. The fact that there are 1/3 of the angelic host that rebelled proves they do have free will and choice. Because if they had no choice, they could not have rebelled.
Satan wouldn't exist as Satan.
Satan would not exist as Satan. On the other hand, Do you want to worship a God that simply holds his thumb over you and says, you don't have a choice? You will serve me whether you like it or not. Or do you want a God that says, I want you to serve me because you love me and because I love you?
Well, it's like as a parent, you don't want to have to beat your child to do what you want them to, or you want them to be able to think for themselves and to make good choices.
Right. Now, if the angels who chose to serve God and never rebelled see that God basically does this and does not allow even them to think for themselves, then what kind of God are we serving? Not only do we, or I should say, not only do those angels need to see what the result of sin will do, but we, the church, need to see that, because who else during all this is going to be standing back watching?
Us.
We are. We're privy to all this because we're going to be there. So, God allows this so that we, the church, and the 2/3 of the angels that are faithful to him can see this is what sin does. This is what sin causes. And so that for that reason, those 2/3 of the angels that are faithful, they pull their swords and fight for God because they see this is what the devil does. This is what sin causes. I believe that is as well that at the end of the millennial kingdom, people have asked, why does God allow Satan to gather an army and, rebel once again? Because by that point there will have been 1,000 years worth of people populating the earth that have lived under the rule of the King of Kings, and they need for themselves to see the King of Kings is not a despot. He is a ruler of love, and they and we, the church, need to see once again this is what sin does. So that we will not sin, not because God's got his thumb on us, but because we have come to the conclusion we want to be obedient and we want to serve because we serve a God who is serving from, or who is ruling over us out of love, not out of despotism. I believe that is the reason God allows this war to take place. Because we all know God doesn't have to allow it. All he's got to do is say, be gone, and guess what? They're gone. If the God who can say, peace be still, can control the weather, I'm pretty sure he could have controlled this had he so chosen to do so. But I believe that is the reason he allows this war to take place, is again, so that we are serving him. We, both the church and obedient angels, are serving him for the right reasons and not because we're afraid of what God will do. Because there's a difference between having fear of the Lord and being afraid of the Lord. One's good, one not so much. All right. Now, go a little bit further for tonight. Verse 10 says, and I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the, notice here, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, who accuses them before God day and night. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even to death. In other words, he's saying that we, the church, have been victorious. Now notice this voice from heaven. It doesn't really identify who it is, but since it says our brethren, you think maybe that's probably one of the 24 elders? Could be, but again, we don't know. It's not identified.
I have a question.
All right.
So, how many times does Satan get kicked out of heaven?
Well,
Because I always thought that, because this is new to me, I always thought that he was kicked out of heaven, that's it, and he ain't going back.
I'll put it to you in two different terms. He lost his job, whoever knows how many thousands of years ago, when he rebelled in heaven. But while he lost his job, he did not lose complete access to heaven, because, well, as you see right there in verse 10, it says he accuses him before God day and night. Clearly he still has access to heaven. But at this point, when he is kicked out, this is the first and last time that he is completely kicked out of heaven and will never again have access to the throne of God. So he lost his job once and he gets kicked out once.
His job as a
As the covering cherub. Sort of like if you're a member here of the church, we tell you that, you know what, because of you've been living in sin, you're welcome to continue attending, but you can no longer be a member of our church. But then we let a little time go by, and then you keep stirring up trouble, and you cause commotion, and you start a war. Then we say, you know what, you can't even come back anymore. That's sort of what this is. Satan is booted out, said you don't have a job anymore, you're no longer the covering cherub, but God allows him to come back into his presence as the accuser. But then in this passage he said, don't even come back anymore. You're gone. Stay off the property.
Did he just compare you to Satan?
That's not the worst I've heard, so.
I didn't call her a devil.
Real quick, before you go on any further, back to the beginning of this section. Michael and his angels. You told us earlier that Michael is the archangel. There's only one ever mentioned.
Go to Jude.
Not a class or group.
Go to Jude.
He's the head angel.
Go to Jude.
And this pretty much right here tells you that Michael and his angels.
Yeah, but
like
go
he's in charge of the angels.
All right, go to the Epistle of Jude.
Go to Jude.
Yes, go to Jude.
Okay. If I can find Jude.
It's just the
One
last
book
epistle
back.
before you get to Revelation.
Okay.
If you get to 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, you've gone too far.
We'll be in the first chapter.
It would also be the last chapter.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Now, read for us verse 9.
Verse 9.
Verse 9
Of what? Of Jude.
Jude.
of the only chapter of Jude.
Put between two pages. But Michael, the archangel.
Thank you.
When
You
he's
just went
defeating
far
the
enough
devil.
right there.
The archangel.
Uh-huh.
It's not one of the archangels, it's the.
The.
The man,
By the way,
the man.
in Greek, and you can confirm this in your definitions there. In Greek, the term archangel literally means the chief angel. Not one of chiefs, but the chief angel is literally what that means. All right. And we're going to go down through verse 12 and then call it quits for tonight. Verse 12 says, "For this reason rejoice, O heavens, you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time." Now, two things here that we see in verse 12. Of course, there's rejoicing in heaven because now the accuser is gone, which tells us judgment day is over with. So there's rejoicing now because all of these, demons, the devil himself, they're gone. They are no longer allowed to have access to heaven. However, John says, unfortunately, woe to the people on earth, because guess what? Now he's down there on earth, because if the devil got kicked out of heaven, now again, as we mentioned earlier, you think he's going willingly? No. So if he's kicked out, what kind of emotional state do you think Satan and the rest of those demons are in at this point?
He's
Cranky.
Raging war.
They're raging mad. And so now they find themselves on earth, and when you've got somebody that is just pure evil, if they figure, if we can't hurt God, guess what they will do?
They'll hurt.
They'll hurt God's people.
Is this why the last 3.5 years are so bad?
That is exactly the reason these last 3.5 years the heat just gets cranked up, because now you've got the devil who is mad as a hornet. He figures, I'm going to take it out on Israel, and I'm going to take it out on those who have accepted Christ, the elect, during the tribulation period. Now we know he is going to do, as we continue studying, we'll find that the common denominator in all of that is that of those who are found to have accepted Christ, and doesn't matter Jew and Gentile, during the tribulation period, if they are caught, they lose their heads. We haven't gotten that far yet, but yes, one of the things we're going to see is that the preferred method of execution of Christians during the tribulation period is decapitation. I'll let you stew on that for a while, but that is one of the reasons why my personal opinion is I think Islam and Sharia law are going to be the law of the land during that period of time.
I agree.
Now, the last thing here says, he said, got great wrath knowing he has only a short time. Well, again, the devil knows he can't win, and he knows at this point his days are numbered. The clock is ticking. And so, of course, what does anybody do that thinks like that is just full of hatred?
Do as much damage as
Going to do as much damage as we can in the time we got. Absolutely.
Tantrum.
Yeah, he's throwing a temper tantrum. Now, last point I want to make, and then we call it quits for the night. The fact that it says early on that Israel flees into the wilderness for 42 months, then it says here that the devil comes down to earth and is continuing to cause havoc, and even steps up the amount of havoc he's causing. That's another reason that, based on this context, would seem to indicate that this happens at the midpoint of the tribulation. Of course, at that point, where's the church? As we just saw,
We're in the balcony.
With Jesus.
church is already with Jesus. This completely eliminates the possibility of a mid-tribulation rapture. The church is already in heaven and has already experienced Judgment Day. And then the devil gets thrown out. This midpoint of the tribulation here, folks. That's why, again, I mentioned to you earlier, you cannot read the book of Revelation from start to finish and see it as a chronological, from point A to point B. John bounces around in here, and at this point, we're back now to the midpoint. All right, questions this evening?
Too many.
Too many questions? Never said it was easy.
I just have a comment about this thing about John going like back and forth. I was watching this video, and they were showing this boat going through these terrible waves and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
So they showed the whole strip of the boat doing this, and then they went back and they showed slow motion activities of down this big wave, almost getting swamped and stuff like this, and then they went back to the whole video again.
Uh-huh.
So it's kind of like this back and forth type thing that you can get when you're trying to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
Because you remember other stuff or other points that
Yeah,
occurred.
it's just they give you the overview, and then they go back and they give you the good stuff that you can really enjoy as it's going real nice and slow,
And how many of us have actually watched a movie that, it always starts off with almost the conclusion or the climax of the movie, and then you'll see 3 weeks prior, and then it shows you the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
That's exactly what John's doing here. He's almost given us the climax, and then it's like, okay, now 3.5 years prior. Anybody else?
Just real quick, so are they both running in parallel then, the war on Earth, Armageddon, and the war in heaven? Or are
No, this war in heaven occurs at the 3.5 year point.
they- okay.
Armageddon occurs toward the end of the tribulation.
Yep.
And somewhere in this process, there's also what we call Ezekiel's war, which occurs sometime during all of that. And we don't really have a good time frame for that.
Is that the one with the chariot with the whirling? Oh gosh.
No, that's Ezekiel's description of being taken up by the cherubim.
Yeah.
Completely different, you know.
I'm trying to.
It's
The next two
38, 39
verses
or
where
whatever.
we stop
Ezekiel.
describe
Yeah.
Satan pursuing his war and persecution of the children of the woman,
Uh-huh.
Israel.
Israel.
So that's when he ramps up the war that leads to the war of Armageddon.
All right. Anybody else? Bruce, would you lead us in a bit?